The world exported about $26 trillion of goods last year, and the headline ranking tells you far less than you would think. China alone sells close to double what the United States does. But the Netherlands out-exports India, which should immediately make you suspicious of the whole table. In this video, we rank global trade every way that matters. Who exports the most in raw dollars, and why part of that number is an illusion. Then the measures that actually reveal something: exports per person, exports as a share of your own economy, and the biggest question of all, does exporting more actually make a country richer? We will also cover export-led growth, the strategy that carried Asia from poor to rich within a single lifetime, the arithmetic sitting underneath every trade war, who is rising next, and whether the whole model still works in a world of returning tariffs and advancing automation. Let's start with the ranking. The world exported about $26 trillion of goods last year, and the ranking is less balanced than most people imagine. In first place, China, at roughly $3.8 trillion. That is not a narrow lead. It is close to double the country in second place. Second, the United States, at around $2.1 trillion. Third, Germany, at about $1.7 trillion, and notably Germany's exports actually shrank slightly last year. Then the Netherlands at around $920 billion, followed by Japan, South Korea, Italy, France, Mexico, and Canada, with the United Arab Emirates now breaking into the top 10 as well. Notice something already. 3 of those names are small countries. Hold that thought, because the headline ranking hides something important, and we will come back to it. China alone exports nearly double what the United States does. How did that happen in a single generation? 3 things stacked together. First, scale. An enormous workforce moved from farms into factories, giving China a supply of labor no competitor could match. Second, deliberate policy. From 1978, China opened up, built special economic zones, welcomed foreign factories and technology, and joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, which threw open the world's markets. Third, and this is the part people underrate, infrastructure. Ports, roads, railways, and power built at a speed no other country attempted, so goods could actually move. And China has climbed the ladder. It no longer just assembles cheap goods. It is now a leading exporter of electric vehicles, batteries, and solar panels. The factory became an innovator. The United States is second in the world for exporting goods. But that statistic badly undersells it, because it leaves out the category America actually dominates. Services, software, cloud computing, finance, consulting, engineering, education, entertainment, and intellectual property licensing. These are exports too. When a European company pays for American cloud services, or a student pays tuition at an American university, that is an export. It simply crosses the border invisibly. And on services, the United States is comfortably the largest exporter on Earth, running a substantial services surplus even while it runs a large deficit in goods. It is also worth noting how little America depends on exports overall, at only around 1/10 of its economy, because its own domestic market is so vast. Which brings us to a much better question than who exports most. Germany is the 3rd largest exporter on Earth, from a country of around 84 million people. Its strength is specific, high-value manufacturing. Cars, industrial machinery, chemicals, and precision engineering, much of it made by the Mittelstand, thousands of medium-sized, often family-owned firms that dominate narrow global niches you have never heard of. But the German model is under real strain. Its exports actually fell last year. Energy costs rose sharply after it lost cheap Russian gas. Chinese carmakers went from being customers to being competitors, and in electric vehicles, they moved faster. And German industry is deeply exposed to Chinese demand, so a Chinese slowdown lands directly on German factories. Being a great exporter is not a permanent status. It has to be re-earned as technology changes. Here is the statistic that should make you suspicious. The Netherlands, with about 18 million people, exports far more than India, which has over 1 billion. Is the Netherlands really that productive? Partly, but mostly no. This is the re-export effect. Rotterdam is Europe's largest port. Goods from all over the world arrive there, get unloaded, and are shipped onward into Germany, France, and the rest of Europe. Many are counted as Dutch imports and then as Dutch exports, even though nothing meaningful was made in the Netherlands. Economists call this entrepot trade. Singapore, Belgium, and Hong Kong show exactly the same pattern. So when you see a small country ranked absurdly high in export tables, always ask the same question. Are they making it, or just moving it? Now flip the measure, and the world turns upside down. Instead of total exports, divide by population. Suddenly China, the runaway leader, drops far down the table because that enormous export figure is spread across more than 1 billion people. And who goes to the top? Small, open, trade-focused economies. Singapore, the Netherlands, Belgium, Ireland, Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates. Countries with a few million people each, exporting sums that would be respectable for a nation 10 times their size. Why? Because a small country cannot survive selling only to itself. The domestic market is simply too small, so trade is not a strategy, it is a necessity. This is the first sign that total export volume tells you about a country's size far more than it tells you about its success. Here is the measure that reveals who is genuinely exposed. Exports as a share of your own economy. Singapore's exports are worth around 174% of its entire economy, more than the whole country produces, which is only possible because so much passes through and is re-exported. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Ireland all run enormous ratios too. Germany sits somewhere in the middle, around 40 to 50%, high for a large economy. And the United States? Only about 10%. China, despite being the world's biggest exporter, is around 20% because its domestic market is now gigantic. So who is most vulnerable to a trade war? Not the biggest exporter, the most dependent one. Size protects you. Openness exposes you. That is why small trading nations fight hardest to keep global trade rules intact. So why does every developing country want to export? Because of the single most successful growth strategy in modern economic history, export-led growth. The logic is powerful. Your own population is poor, so they cannot buy much. But rich countries can, so you produce for them instead. That gives you a market far bigger than your own, foreign currency to buy machinery and technology, and brutal competitive pressure that forces your firms to get better fast. Then you climb the ladder, from textiles to electronics, to cars, to semiconductors. Japan did it after the war. South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong followed and became rich within a single lifetime. China ran the same playbook at extraordinary scale. Growth rates of 7, 8, even 10% a year, sustained for decades, almost always traced back to exports. Now the question that ties it all together. Does exporting more make a country richer? Look at the evidence carefully. China is the world's largest exporter by a huge margin, and its output per person is still around the middle of the global table, roughly $13,000, far below Western Europe. Singapore exports a fraction of China's total, and its citizens are among the richest on Earth. So volume alone clearly does not do it. What actually raises income per person is not how much you export, but what you export and how much value you add. Assembling somebody else's product for a small margin makes you busy. Designing the chip, owning the brand, or providing the finance makes you wealthy. Exports are the road. Moving up the value chain is the destination. Here is the uncomfortable arithmetic behind every trade argument. The world cannot all run a surplus. Exports and imports must balance globally. So if one country sells far more than it buys, somebody else is buying more than they sell. One country's surplus is another country's deficit, by definition. That is why persistent large surpluses generate political conflict. Germany has been criticized for years, including by other Europeans, for running big surpluses while spending and investing too little at home, effectively relying on foreign demand rather than generating its own. China faces the same charge on a far bigger scale, and the deficit side generates its own politics, with tariffs, industrial policy, and trade restrictions returning across the world. Trade is not just economics. It is a permanent argument about who buys and who sells. So who is rising? Watch 4 names. Vietnam has become one of the fastest growing exporters in the world, taking electronics and textile manufacturing as companies diversify away from relying on China alone. Mexico has surged, thanks to its border with the United States and the shift toward nearshoring, moving production closer to the customer, and it has become one of America's largest trading partners. India is pushing hard into electronics assembly and already dominates in software and services exports. And the United Arab Emirates has broken into the top 10 goods exporters, building on energy and on its role as a global trade hub. The common thread is a shift the whole world is making, from chasing the absolute cheapest supplier to building supply chains that are shorter, friendlier, and harder to disrupt. So the big question: can a poor country still grow rich by exporting the way Japan, Korea, and China did? It has genuinely got harder for 3 reasons. Tariffs and trade barriers are rising again after decades of falling, so world markets are less open than they were. Automation means cheap labor is a weaker advantage because robots do not relocate to where wages are low. And China already occupies enormous parts of the manufacturing ladder, so there are fewer easy rungs left to climb. But the strategy is not dead. Vietnam and Mexico are proving it still works, and services exports have opened a completely new route, since software, design, and back-office work cross borders with no ships at all. The road to wealth still runs through selling to the world. It just does not look like a factory anymore. So what do you think? Does export-led growth still work? Tell me in the comments, and share this with someone who argues about trade. Let's put the whole board together. On total goods exports, China leads at roughly $3.8 trillion, then the United States at about $2.1 trillion, then Germany at $1.7. But that table hides the fact that the United States is the world's largest exporter of services, which cross borders invisibly. The Netherlands and Singapore rank far above their real production because goods pass through their ports and get counted twice, which economists call entrepot trade. Measured per person, the ranking inverts entirely, and small, open economies dominate. Measured as a share of a country's own economy, Singapore runs around 174%, while the United States is near 10%, which tells you exactly who is genuinely exposed to a trade war. Export-led growth built modern Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and China. And the world cannot all run a surplus at once, which is why persistent surpluses in Germany and China generate permanent political conflict. So the real lesson of world trade is that volume and wealth are 2 different achievements. China won the volume game outright and did it in a single generation. Germany earns more from 4 million cars than others earn from 20 because it sells at the expensive end of the market. And a country can ship enormous quantities and still have middling income per person, because what determines your wealth is not how much you export, but how much value you add to it. Assembling somebody else's product makes you busy. Designing it, branding it, or financing it makes you wealthy. That is the ladder every developing country is trying to climb, and it is getting harder as tariffs return and automation erodes the advantage of cheap labor. So tell me, which country do you think climbs that ladder next? Write it in the comments. I read every one. If this was useful, share it with someone who argues about trade, and subscribe for more economics made simple. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. See you in the next video.